Hi, my name is Khadija Mackenzie, and I'll be discussing trauma and human rights. Human rights are rights inherent to all human beings, regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, religion, language, or any other status. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights suggests that we all were born free and equal in dignity and rights, and we are all entitled to our freedom, the right to life, liberty, security, and no one should be enslaved. We all should have like adequate living standard and etc. So trauma is an emotional response to a perceived harmful or threatening event or series of events. This is a trauma tree, and the roots of the tree actually has listed different types of trauma, such as assault, rape, terrorism, abuse, natural disasters, and etc. Um, the stem is pretty much like not dealing with the trauma and what becomes of it. So it's like, say for instance, the person might have like the wrong diagnoses and treatment, or like they're not dealing with it at all. And this could kind of like lends itself to post-traumatic stress, depression, and other psychotic like disorders. So these presents itself as like panic attacks, anxiety, detachment, flashbacks, insomnia, and the list goes on. So when we're dealing with trauma, it's important to engage in trauma-informed care. And trauma-informed care is the ability to understand the involvement and impact of trauma in the lives of the people we serve, and applying this knowledge to the services we deliver to them. So trauma-informed care consists of like the 4 R's. So first we have to realize that like majority of the people that we work with or like encounter are likely to experience victimization or like violence throughout their lives. Um, and also like two, to recognize the different signs, say for instance, maybe a child who's like sexually abused at home. So maybe like a sign of that is like that the child is like, maybe the child is like peeing a lot and they can't maintain their bladder, stuff like that. And like just recognizing the different signs and symptoms. And then three is to kind of respond in a way that is not harmful to the person you're working with. Um, so just basically like developing program and like kind of like changing organization policy to cater to the people that you work with without re-traumatizing them, which is number 4. So the goal is to avoid re-traumatization. So, along with like providing care for individuals who have experienced trauma, the type of services that we often provide are trauma-specific services, and these are interventions developed to treat the symptoms related to past or current trauma. So, a type of trauma-specific service is EMDR, and that is like a special like service that does like the eye movement with like clients, and therapists needs to be trained in EMDR like before they can practice it on anyone, and the training is like really long. So throughout our work, it's possible that we might have some countertransference going on, and this pretty much is the conscious and unconscious emotional response of the therapist towards the contribution of the client or the action of the client. So, for instance, like the client shared something throughout the session that like the therapist did not agree with, maybe have like a whole own personal bias. Um, and then the therapist just reacted to what the client shared without like thinking too hard about it. And this kind of like came off in like a as if the therapist was angry or something like that. So that's like a example of how countertransference will look like throughout a session. So say for instance like the therapist is like snapping at the client, this could possibly re-traumatize the client. And re-traumatization is defined as the recurring of past trauma or the feelings as if the treatment experience is as dangerous and unsafe as one past trauma or an entirely new trauma. So if the therapist is like snapping at the client because the client kind of said something that ticked the therapist off, then that could potentially like re-traumatize the person if um like the therapist's voice kind of remind them of their perpetrator. So it's kind of important to kind of pay attention to counter transference, just to recognize our own biases and attitudes, um, when we're working with others. So as care providers, we also could we can experience secondary trauma, and this is the effects of experiencing the trauma of our clients when providing trauma-focused services or just listening to them talk about their experiences. Secondary trauma, it looks similar to PTSD and it's the same symptoms that you would find with like PTSD. As care providers, we can also experience vicarious trauma, and this is a result of like being exposed to clients' traumatic experiences, and this can also be identified as the presence of trauma-related symptoms, and this also involves the cognitive changes in an individual. So without the cognitive changes, this will most likely be secondary trauma. With the cognitive change, um, is vicarious trauma. So, um, in our practice, um, it is not always bad. Um, a therapist can experience compassion satisfaction, and this is just the positive aspects of working as a helper. And it's like altruism, like you kind of give someone something to come back to work for. The next day, it's like going to work, you're happy, you're like satisfied. However, if you go to work and you're not like, you don't have that satisfaction, the opposite of that is compassion fatigue. And even if you have compassion satisfaction along with compassion fatigue, this could lead to burnout. And compassion fatigue alone can lead to burnout as well. And burnout is the consequence of high stress in our job, which causes to feel emotionally exhausted, and we're most likely um, able to depersonalize others and do not have like the personal drive that we did before. Um, so it is important that we take care of ourselves. So resilience is the ability to return to the level of functioning we had prior to the traumatic event with only like minimal reactions following the event. So An example of this is just, say for instance, someone had a car accident and it was like really traumatic, but the person was able to kind of like cope with the incident, and then they were able to kind of like go back to their daily life. So they were able to go back to work, like drive again without the additional like issues. So then like stress related growth is the perception of benefiting from a stressful event and developing a higher level of functioning. Post traumatic growth is similar to stress related growth. However, post traumatic growth is a perception of benefiting from a traumatic event. So the trauma piece is like the important piece that's kind of separated too. And this also like you develop a higher level of functioning. So it's not the same as like resilience, because resilience you return to the same level you were before. Stress related growth and post traumatic growth, you are at a higher level of functioning after the trauma or like stressful event. So, given that we learn about all the different terms, it is important to practice self care. And self care basically is like referring to activities and practices that we all engage in to reduce stress and to maintain our well being. So, it is always important to take care of yourself first, because if we're not taking care of ourselves, we can't take care of others. And as care providers, we are experiencing stress all the time. We're like working with clients who experience a lot of trauma, and there's so many other things that happens in our daily lives that requires us to kind of like make sure we're taking the time to um, set everything at bay, because if not, we're gonna start getting burnout, or we can like have secondary trauma or vicarious trauma, and we could potentially like re-traumatize clients. So it's like a list of stuff, and so it is definitely important to practice self-care. Um, yeah. So this is like the different references that I have. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, just leave comments below. Thank you.